And you have also become probably the most famous Bitcoin evangelist in the world in the process and been embraced by the community. I mean, what's that been like for you? Because that's a transformation.
You know, it's easy to be depressed in the depths, of March of 2020, right? A lot of people went through a difficult time period, and what does Mark Twain says? Two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you figure out why. And so I think it's been very revitalizing for me. It's been revitalizing for MicroStrategy. It brought me in touch with a lot of brilliant, passionate, progressive, idealistic people. I like being plugged into the mission, and I like being plugged into the community. The community is just very motivated and passionate, and just like that MIT story where I said just a lot of very intelligent, bright, young people doing cool things. When I got to MIT, I see a lot of people in the Bitcoin community very passionate, doing very cool things. When I describe Bitcoin, I say it's an economic imperative, it's a technology imperative, and it's a moral imperative. The economic imperative is $400 trillion worth of currency and currency derivatives that are being devalued by the currency devaluation. So everybody in the world has this problem, right? So it's motivational to have a solution to the problem faced by every investor on the planet. If you own bonds, it's $100 trillion worth of bonds with a negative real yield. If you own commercial real estate, your commercial real estate's got rents capped at CPI, which means you have a negative real yield on real estate. If you own value stocks, the value stocks are valued based upon the discounted value of the cash flows. If you have a utility company growing cash flows at 2% a year, and if the currency is devaluing at 15% a year, you've got a negative real yield on your cash flows. So everybody in the world sitting with cash or currency derivatives has a problem. We've got a solution. That's pretty motivational. I think from big tech, if you look at the tech imperative, this is what Bitcoin is to me. Bitcoin is digital property, which means that if you wanted to give joy to 5 billion people, you would give them digital music on a mobile device, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Pandora. That's how you give music to 5 billion people. You can't give them an orchestra or a Steinway grand piano or a phonograph or a record or a CD. You just can't do it that way. The 20th century music solution is too expensive and cumbersome to give music in the 21st century to everybody. If you wanted to give education and erudition to 5 billion people, you can't do it with MIT and Harvard and libraries and books and teachers and professors. You need to do it with digital books and digital education. You need YouTube and iBooks, and that's why Google and that's why Apple are exploding in value. If you want to give wealth to 5 billion people, Brian, you can't do it with gold. You can't do it with land. You can't do it with buildings, and you can't do it with 20th century stocks. You can't do it with collectibles and art. You can't do it with diamonds. Those are 20th century property. They work for the elite. You can give 10% of the people wealth that way. You can give 10 or 20% of the people wealth with banks and stock exchanges. If you want to give 5 billion people wealth, you need to give them digital property. You need to give them digital gold on an open monetary protocol running on a $50 Android phone. And that's what Bitcoin is. Once you understand what we've got here, you put Bitcoin together with an Android phone with an application. It could be a layer 2 decentralized application like Lightning, or it could be Square Cash App, or it could be PayPal, or it could be Apple Pay or Google Pay. But when you put together mobile devices with software and you plug it into digital property, you have the means to give everybody on Earth property rights, and you can move it at the speed of light, and you can make it as smart as your iPhone or your Android phone can be smart. And there's no one on the planet that hasn't figured out digital photos, digital video, digital books on a smart device is a better idea, and it's the way to create a utilitarian entitlement. And so when I say it's a tech imperative, I mean, A, it's a pretty good idea for Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook. And if they don't do it, then Jack Dorsey at Square or at PayPal is going to eat their lunch and do it for them. You can't stop that. The genie's out of the bottle. But I also say it's a tech imperative because they have to do it, right? It's like they have to do it because, iCloud with your photos and your videos is interesting, but iCloud with $100 trillion of your money is compelling. When Apple doesn't do it, Facebook's going to do it. And if Facebook wants to push back against Apple, they need to put digital property in the Facebook app. So it's coming, and it's the next chapter of the mobile wave. It's like mobile property in the palm of your hand. When people don't get it if they're elitist in the Western world. Yeah, you live in Manhattan, you got a bank, and you have you have your money invested in NASDAQ. Okay, well, good for you. What's your solution to the 2 billion people in Africa and Asia and South America don't live in Manhattan, don't have a bank account, don't have a brokerage? The 1.7 billion people on the planet don't have a bank, and when they actually make some money, they can buy the local currency, and the local currency is devaluing at 80% a year. Okay? That's what people don't get. So the next big tech move is digital property on mobile devices, and that takes me to the moral imperative. The moral imperative is you want to give property rights to 8 billion people on the planet. You're not going to give it to them by preaching. You're not going to give it to them with politics. You're not going to give them books. You can't physically ship 1 ounce of gold to everybody on the planet. And if you could, there's a 40% markup, a 30% markdown, a 6-week delay, and you can't program the gold. How am I going to actually build a 21st century economy on a rock? I can't do it. And I can't do it with the 20th century banking system. The 20th century banking system is a couple of central banks wired through thousands of fractional banks that don't operate on the weekends or the evenings. If I wanted to do business with a company in Nigeria, it would take me 25 years. If I took $1 billion, Brian, and 25 years, I still could not do business with a company in Nigeria or Zimbabwe. I cannot do it. You could spin up a mobile app in Nigeria that accesses the Bitcoin protocol and plug it into another mobile app in Argentina that's plugged into another bank in Syria, plugged into a retailer in Iran, Iraq, Russia, the US, Manhattan, Wyoming, and Mexico. And you could thread that together using the open protocols of Bitcoin as a settlement layer and Lightning as a transaction layer. And you could do that without asking anybody's permission, and you could do it now. And is it happening? Yes, it is happening right now. It's happening in El Salvador right now. So the thing that's most exciting to me is there's a lot of academics and a lot of politicians, and they preach, let's make the world a better place. But when you go to MIT and you look up on those buildings, and you see all the great scientists, and you see Maxwell, right? And you see Edison, and you see Einstein, and you see Newton, you're reminded that if you really want to better the human condition, give them fire. And when you're done with that, give them electricity. And when you're done with that, give them antibiotics and then radiation, right there. You need technology. You're not, radio, right? We went from a life expectancy of 50 to a life expectancy of 70 from 1900 to 1950. We didn't do that with preaching and politics and elections. We did that through the conquest of infectious disease, and that comes down to two ideas: sterilization and antibiotics. And so what does it mean what are property rights? I mean, we know life, liberty, and property. John Locke gave us that idea. What does it really mean? I'll give you a biological metaphor. If you're a type 1 diabetic, you can't form insulin, which means you can't create fat. What is fat? Fat is an organic battery. It's a battery to store organic energy. Nature came up with a battery to store organic energy. Insulin is what actually converts the excess energy into fat. If you have it, you live 90 days without food. If you don't have it, you eat nonstop and you starve to death. Property is socioeconomic battery. And so if I have an excess 3 months worth of salary and I can store it in property, it means I can lose my job and not starve to death. When I deprive you of property rights and I deprive you of property, you live hand to mouth, which means in the week when you lose your job, your children go hungry. So yeah, in America, when you have a bank and you store dollars and they lose 1 or 2% of their value a month, it's just a problem. When you live in Africa, you don't have a bank and you can't store dollars and you have to keep money in a local currency and it loses 1 to 2% of its value a week. At that point, you've lost your property rights. And if you've lost your property rights, it's hopeless. You know, it is a type 1 diabetic can eat nonstop. They starve to death. It's a death sentence. The lack of property rights is a death sentence. So if you want to give, and what do you see happens? Well, you know, literally some people starve to death, but when you have hyperinflation like the Weimar Republic, when you have hyperinflation in Zimbabwe or Venezuela, or you see the kind of inflation that's coming and is manifesting in Argentina or is in Syria or Lebanon lost 90% of the value of the currency in 1 year. The government devalued the currency 90%, froze everybody's US dollar balances in the bank. If you had money in US dollars or in Lebanese pounds, you lost 90 to 95% of everything. Okay, so where's your property? How do you eat, right? That's the problem with losing property rights. So what happens when you have hyperinflation? It's like you become a diabetic, a type 1 diabetic. Your batteries start to drain. What you get is a collapse of the currency, a collapse of property, and you get ripped back to the Stone Age barter. So, you know, the entire modern economy collapses if you don't have the ability to store economic energy, and that causes the collapse of the society. And we can see that.